All right. Hello, everyone. This is lecture 2. So, if you have not yet watched or looked at lecture 1, you need to go back and do that before you go through this. With this lecture, you have notes attached. I'm going to go over those first. So, here are your notes for lecture 2. You need to follow along with this video, or you can look at the Google Slides, which are posted, whichever you prefer. All of the notes go in order, and they're meant to check your understanding of the information. So I'm not asking you to copy and paste, but answer questions in your own words. And I really want to stress that if you don't understand, it is okay. There's a space for each slide, on each slide, for you to ask questions. So an example here is the first slide. Slide 3, taverns and inns. The question is, what is the meaning of loyalist and separatist, and why would it be important to know what kind of tavern or inn you were going into during this time? You answer here, and if you have a question or you're not understanding anything, you simply type it right there, and I will get back to you. It's the same layout for each slide. Some slides don't have any questions, but they still have the space for you to ask questions if you're confused. And please, please, please feel free to do so. This is new information being provided to you in a relatively new manner. So don't be upset if you have a question. I'm still here to help you, just like we were in the classroom. You would raise your hand and ask a question. You can't raise your hand, so I've provided a space for you to essentially virtually raise your hand to me, okay? So let's get started. So we're going to talk about community buildings and organizations in Maine's history. It's going to be a relatively brief review. This lecture is going to be a little bit longer than the other one, so we'll give a space to pause for you to take a break and catch up on your notes. A key for the slide is there are primary sources that are linked in that I'm going to have you guys look at. Those are all in yellow. Any question you need to answer in your notes, so that's a indication that you need to go back to your notes, is at the bottom in black. And all vocab terms are underlined. So if you're not sure what they mean, go back to this Quizlet. I have a link here that I made for you guys that has all of the definitions in them. Okay, let's get started. So one of the first historical community buildings that we see in Maine are roadside stops, which are just taverns and inns, and they were very common in the early colonial Anglo-Americans. So before the American Revolution, you know, that big revolution that led to the creation of America and the colony separating from Britain, the taverns would have signs or symbols that indicated whether they were loyalists or separatists. Loyalists were those who wanted to remain loyal and wanted to stay a part of Britain or the crown, and separatists were those who wanted to politically separate. So through this example, seeing that there's different political beliefs, there's community buildings that are then separated based on those, it shows us that community sometimes just means what our political views are. So we have different buildings that are designated for people who have different political views, not necessarily based on geographical location, but based on what you believe. So in your notes, answer, what is the meaning of loyalist and separatist? And why would it be important to know what kind of inn or tavern you were going in during this time? You can pause here, take a minute to answer, and then come back. So here are some primary sources, and I want you to look at these. You need to look at these in order to be able to answer the question. So our first primary source that we're going to link out to is Long Live the King. So which group do you think would have a button that says Long Live the King? Loyalists or separatists? So here's the definition or the explanation. It says button celebrated King George III and the recovery from his long illness in 1789. This was recovered from Captain George Tate, who served as a masked agent in 1751 during the Revolutionary War. So this is a primary source artifact that is from a loyalist. Then we have our second primary source, which is a drawing of the Alice Greeley Tavern in Portland. So this was Charles Quincy Goodhue. It was by him. So it was an amateur artist who designed a sketch or created a sketch of what it would look like before the fire in 1866. So this gives us a glimpse as to what these taverns looked like during this time. All right, now I would like you to answer, what do these primary sources tell you about taverns or inns? So what did you see or what did it show you? You can take a minute to look further at these sources and read the definitions more thoroughly. So pause here for a moment and answer that question. All right, so we have town halls. So we still have town halls, but back in the early 1800s, town hall served as a place and as an event for many Euro-American communities. So a town hall meeting would typically begin with the ringing of a bell, which would then be followed by discussion about setting, establishing, and maintaining order in the community. So we have to think back into the 1800s, we were still figuring out what our rules were, how we were going to maintain them, what the rule of law looked like. So they would talk about things such as border disputes or disputes between farmers or how they were going to implement laws. So some of these aspects of historical town halls still exist within town hall meetings today. And a modern example of what a town hall may have resembled is a presidential debate. You have several high ranking figures up on a stage discussing, debating what to do about important rules and cultural standards that maintain the order of our community. So, is there a town hall here in your community in Fryeburg? This is the question you need to answer. Is there a town hall in your community? Have you ever been, and what goes on there? If you're not sure, just reflect and think what might be going on. Take a second to answer this. Right, so here are some primary sources. So I would like you to look through these and give me one interesting fact that you learned from looking at these. So the first one is a meeting house in Lovell. Then we have another picture of a town hall. So let's look at the first meeting house. So this is what it looked like. This is where the proprietors of Lovell voted to build a meeting house. So this was their first meeting house. It was held in 1801. And the building is 2.5 stories high, but it was then lowered to 1 story. So this is what they would have looked like. Then we have a town hall in Perry. And just another example of what a town hall would look like. And then here's your description here. So it was also used as a school later on. So initially it was a brick schoolhouse, which they used as a town hall, and then it was turned into a school. Another town hall in Harrington. So this one looks a little different, a little more elaborate than the other ones. Here's your description. Sorry, that was my dog. This is the 1838 Bath Town House expense report. So this one isn't necessarily a building, but it's just, they would talk about expenses, what they were spending in the town, and someone would report it out. So here's a description of what is in there. And then lastly, we have the Isboro Town Meeting. So this is what it would look like when the people came and gathered at that town meeting. So this one's later, it's in 1933, but it gives you an idea of what it would look like when these people would gather. And here's your description here. So what you should do is take a minute, take a deeper look at maybe 1 or 2 of these so that you can answer this question. What is one interesting fact you learned looking at these primary sources? Take a minute and pause here, and then we'll move on. Right. Meeting houses and places of worship. So many communities, especially in the 17th to 20th century, and those communities made up of immigrants, were built around places of worship, which were based on a common or a shared religion by a particular cultural identity. Ooh, that cultural identity should be underlined. I'll go back and underline it for the slides I'll upload. So this means that if you think about specifically the Europeans who were coming over in waves in the 1920s, many of them gathered as a community based on their religion. So think about Catholics. Many Europeans were Catholics and they congregated together, they formed their community based on their cultural identity and their shared religion. Now, this may be a stretch, but can you remember which group met in a place of worship in the 1920s and the number one enemy was Catholics? So what this example shows us is that community can sometimes mean a gathering place of similar religion, another example of having a similar belief that creates a community. And this can be, in this case, religion. Here we have a primary source that I'd like you to explore. It's the First Congregational Church in City Hall, Brewer. So this is what it would have looked like. Very similar to what you'd see churches look like today. It's a painting. This is from 1910. Oh, there we go. Don't know why I did that. So another example of places of worship is this meeting house in Portland. This was the first black church in Portland that was established in 1828. The Abyssine was a place where these African American or black residents could worship together and support one another, something a community does. It supports and it strengthens those ties. And it was also a place where they could segregate to less desirable pews, and they were primarily worked where there were primarily white churches elsewhere in town. So they could escape that segregation and go to these places. So when we talked before yesterday about places that include and exclude, so this is a place that includes blacks where they were otherwise excluded. They also hosted visiting lecturers who spoke out against slavery. So this is also getting to a common belief, cultural heritage, or cultural identity. So we see all of these things in this church. So here is what this church looked like, or a rough sketch of what this church looked like. And here we have a description. And then we have two primary sources. So this is the creation of the church. It talks about what that looked like. And then the second one here is it informs the public. It's just an advertisement for the church. It gives you some idea of how they talked about and what they would have been advertising. Then here's a second example that's different. So this is in New Sweden, and it was founded in kind of a recruitment effort or an effort to colonize northern Maine. So the Swedish immigrants who were populating this area were of the Protestant religion. So the first Lutheran church was built in 1880, but before it was completed, these members held services in the town hall. So it was a place where they could congregate in order to pull them over into that Protestant religion. So this is what it looked like. It's from 1930. Remember, this is when we're talking about when those large waves of European immigrants were coming over into the United States. And then I have some primary sources. Look at pages, hopefully it links you out. So look at pages 4 and 5, which primarily focus on different community or religious community buildings and organizations in Maine's history. And then answer the question, how does religion show a relationship between a specific community and a community building? So think, how does having a shared belief, such as a religion, show that there can be a tie between a community and a building? We talked about, in this example, Swedish immigrants who are then congregating in a specific place based on their religious views. And then in this example here, we talk about Blacks congregating together based on a specific belief in this location. So think, how does it show that relationship? Take a minute to answer your question. Pause if you need to, and move on to the next slide. We're about halfway done. So if you need to pause and take a longer break, feel free to do so. You can also do that at any point. This is me giving you a lecture that you can do at your own pace. So then we have the YMCA and the YWCA. So the Young Men's Club of America and the Young Women's Club of America. The Young Men's Christian Association and the Young Women's Christian Association. It was formed originally, it's from London, and it came to America through Boston around the 1850s as a group for men's Bible study and other social activities. What we see historically is that religious groups and groups that hold a specific belief are what promote a lot of community organizations and social activities. So this was a place for people on the streets to find refuge. So we have your first gymnastic building in the YMCA, which appeared in the late 1860s. So what this did is it met the need of those people who were on the streets who didn't have a place to go. It gave them a sense of involvement in their community. So these buildings had reading rooms that appeared later in Maine, so a place for these people to read. It provided activities that expanded outside the building, which focused on helping communities, especially youth, through athletics. And they also hosted gymnastics and swimming classes. So what this does is it meets that need of a community. It sees that the youth, need to be involved. They need to be socially active, and it creates a way to meet that need through gymnastics or swimming classes or reading, making those connections so that they feel a part of the community. Here is your primary source. So this is the corner view of the first YMCA in Bangor. You may recognize the name YMCA because it's very popular. I know that when I was younger, I swam at a YMCA. So it was a way to get me involved in my community, and that's how it started. So here's your description here. Then we have sporting clubs. And those are still fairly common today. You have, your golf clubs or your different types of sporting clubs, maybe hunting clubs too. So as tourism, as we see in the 19th century, people start having some money to spend to move around and explore different places in the United States, and the tourism starts to rise in Maine, people wanted to start to form clubs to entertain themselves, to take excursions out into the woods so that they could explore. So they would explore out in the woods, they would establish these lodges as a meeting place, and it would form a strong community togetherness. So you're all meeting together to do a sport together. It's building those community ties. So clubhouses were built for team sports, especially if we think about French Canadian Franco-Americans. They had snowshoeing clubs. We live in Maine. We got plenty of snow, and this was before we had snowmobiles. So there was a lot of snowshoeing clubs in central and northern Maine, and men and women formed the snowshoeing clubs. But remember, this is before we had the, equal rights movement. So we didn't have a lot of gender equality, so they were still separate clubs, but they were clubs for men and women. And here are our primary sources. So we have a picture of what the Parmachene Lake Club looked like. Often they're on lakes because then you can have, canoeing clubs and lake associations. And then we have a second one where we see this one may have been focused more on snowshoeing. See, snowshoeing club was part of a large club. All right. And then this is our last slide, I promise. So fraternal organizations, most of the time when you hear fraternal, you think about frat houses, but there were multiple fraternal organizations that had headquarters in Maine. So we're thinking about the Eagles, the Moose, the Rotary Club, the Lions, the Oddfellows, and the Masons and Freemasons. So it's not the same type of fraternal club. You may recognize Rotary Club, it's still active. The Masons and the Freemasons, which were members of an international order established for mutual help and fellowship, which holds elaborate secret ceremonies. It came over from Europe, from Britain. Masonic lodges are the base name for the meeting places of these Freemasons. So most other fraternal organizations had base lodges that operated on this same Masonic model. So it's just a model of a way to organize these groups. There were about 2,900 lodges in the United States during this time frame, so the later 19th to 20th century. Some men used this membership to promote political and social advantage. So despite the fact that these tried to, stay non-political, stay out of political, just as a way to build community relations, they were political. You always have people who want to be involved because it gives them social advantage. You may connect with someone you would have otherwise not. So say a governor may be a part of this fraternal organization, and that lifts your social status. So we have people who are war heroes that would become Masons, for example. So we've got two primary sources here. This is the Masonic Temple in Portland. And then we have, oh, I guess that one didn't link out. Sorry, guys. All right, then we have, your question. So your question is, let's see, why would an event like the Civil War make men want to seek out membership in a fraternal organization? So what about a war would make men want to have this connected nature with others? And remember that there's a social advantage. There's political advantage. So perhaps you come back from the war in a lower position and you need some upward mobility. You need to find yourself in relation with someone who can get you a job. So maybe a business owner. Why would it be a good thing, or why would you want to join that fraternal organization? All right, take a minute to answer that question, and we are all done for today. Thank you for sticking with me, and I will see you guys soon.